want to take a moment and introduce my colleague Mike Smith and myself. Mike and I serve as principals at AlignOrg Solutions, and we're a small niche consultancy that specializes in the area of organization design. And in addition to organization design, we work with our clients to help them clarify their marketplace position and strategy, to assess their organization's capability to deliver, to ultimately design the right organization to win in the marketplace, and then to implement and effectively realize the results that that design can bring for them. And most of our work is jumping in, rolling up our sleeves and doing that with our clients. But some of the time we also take some of the same tools, methods, and practices that we use in our consultancy and share those with internal professionals so that they can build their own internal capabilities and be more of a change partner for executives. We also do work with executives in helping them prepare for the long transformation journeys that seem to be happening in an always-on fashion these days. Today, through our webinar, we're going to talk a lot about the topic of shared services, how to take advantage of those, how to maximize the results that you get from that, and also the process for how to build them effectively from the ground up. And we have been able to learn as we've done this with a lot of different organizations. Some of these organizations we've been able to partner with. Some of them we have certainly read about. All of us have probably read about. But we find that the stories and the case studies that we get from our partner organizations really help to jumpstart the conversation. Mike and I have the opportunity as we go in and out of organizations to pick up and learn different patterns and different trends that are going on in organizations. And one of the sort of sustaining trends that we've seen for the last many years is this issue of how to get the most out of a shared service organization. It seems like almost inevitably as we go in and out of companies, everyone's got a shared service these days. It usually is set up on the back end of the business around the different support functions, things like human resources, information technology, procurement, sometimes facilities, finance, other kinds of back office functions. And these shared service organizations almost inevitably seem to be causing some kind of angst for the organization. That angst can be that we're not as efficient as we want to be with the shared service. It can be that the shared service is not performing as well as everyone hoped or expected. Sometimes we hear complaints that the shared service is constraining or crimping the business. And so as we continue to work with organizations to try to help them set up and then optimize or maximize a shared service organization, we wanted to share today some of the learnings that we've had and some of the insights we've gained that organizations who get it right, what they seem to be doing and what they seem to be following in terms of steps and practices. So that's really the intent of our conversation today. Now, Vani, when she kicked off this with the logistics before we started, indicated that we're open to questions. And Mike and I both appreciate questions because that helps us tailor some of our comments and so forth to the things that will matter most to those that are listening today. So with that set up, we invite the questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike now to kind of get us started into some of the things that really trigger the setup and start of shared service organizations to start with.
Thanks, Reed. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and talk about this. This is one of my favorite subjects. And as Reed said, we've been dealing with back office shared service transformation for a number of years now, but really in the last 2 or 3 years, we're even seeing organizations that were either happy in a holding type of a situation, they do a merger and they're happy with leaving the company like it is and not trying to gain some of those possible efficiencies and opportunities for synergies there. All of that almost not 100% going away, but the drive to looking at that more often. And because of that, our activity in this space has grown over the past few years. So this is something that's really kicked it off. And there's lots of different ways that trigger, lots of different things that might trigger one of these. And some of them that we've worked on in the last couple of years is a global multinational company. They were an industrial company trying to become more efficient within the IT space and the HR space. And we're a global company with regional offices and regional requirements, language requirements. And so the question became, how do you begin to share services and deliver services across so much complexity on the back end? We've had other companies that came to us and said, hey, we're maturing, we're moving in the maturing model. We've kind of just clipped things on over time as we've grown. And so now it's time for us to take a look at where are the opportunities to marry some of those things up. The market has changed. Companies come to us. One of our chemical companies came to us. This is the third one down, and needed to really show the growth because the market was shifting, and the major players in the market were actually doing different kinds of mergers and acquisitions that were causing this global company that was one of the leaders in the market to reposition themselves, and so therefore repositioning the choices and the capabilities that they needed to have from a shared services opportunity. And then in the financial office, it's called and said, hey, it's not okay for us to just be at par or just be good. We need to be great at certain areas of shared service. Because a shared service doesn't always mean that it's low-cost model. Sometimes it means a high-skilled, high-delivery model that is leveraged across the organization to deliver strategy. So those are just some of the triggers. There's lots of triggers out there that have caused us or suddenly call us and say, hey, can we partner with you and work through these things? And as we talk today, what we want to do is we want to actually provide.
So let me jump in here. It seems that as Mike was walking through this, the listeners today may resonate with some of these possible triggers for a shared service organization. There may be additional triggers, as Mike indicated. I think the important thing to acknowledge is that one size does not fit all. One of the things that we find when we walk around organizations and go in and out of different types of organizations is that we hear leaders talking about, well, our shared services, as if that is some sort of unilateral or singular concept. And the reality is, as Mike just indicated, it's not. There are different things that cause an organization to undertake and to install some type of shared service. And I think these illustrations that Mike has just walked through really highlight that. And I would encourage you listening today to say to yourself, all right, if I'm working in my organization and we've got a shared service, what are some of the prevailing notions about why we set it up and what is it meant to achieve? Because sometimes the dissatisfaction with a shared service may not be because it's not running well or that it's not functioning the way that it could. It's that the expectations of what it's supposed to do may not be fully aligned. For example, if, as Mike explained in the last trigger here, if the shared service organization was set up to improve capabilities and service, someone else in the organization might say, why does it cost so much to have a shared service? Because in their minds, they're thinking the trigger was cost savings. And so it's important to have some similarities in terms of what is the intent of the shared service and what problem is it trying to solve. Now, as we go forward, sorry, Mike, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say, as we go forward, and you're probably going to say it as well, but the idea here is for you to walk away from the presentation today with a framework of how to think about this. So what are the concepts? Reed's going to talk about that right now, but then what is the framework that I might take from this conversation as I start to think about shared services and how they need to interact and how we should build them out within your organization. So Reed, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as Mike said, some of the key concepts that we'd like to base our discussion on today actually come out of our book called Mastering the Cube. Many are probably already familiar with this, so we won't spend a lot of time here. But Mastering the Cube refers to the idea that if we think about an organization in the broadest sense as like a Rubik's Cube, the idea is that if the more you can align each side of the cube, the better your organization potentially can perform. And so we don't get credit if we just solve the structure part of the organization, or if we just get great work processes, or if we get the right talent. If we get the right talent and put them into bad work processes, we still get a bad outcome. We ultimately have to, in essence, solve for all dimensions of the organization, the way the work is done, the way we structure it, the way we measure and count for performance, our talent, our culture, and so forth. And the more we can align all sides of the cube, it's just like solving the Rubik's Cube. You get to say it's complete. And as we think about the shared service concept, there are three big ideas that come out of it. The first is, whenever we're setting up an organization, we want to protect the work that drives strategy, which means that anything that becomes transactional is an opportunity for us to find efficiencies potentially, and to set it apart from the work that really drives differentiation. And that leads to the second concept, is we want to put our resources behind the strategic work and try to manage that in a way that will allow us to stand out in the marketplace and be distinguished, and then to take work that is not strategic and drive that for greater efficiency or greater standardization and consistency. And then the final principle that we want to base our discussion on today is this idea that we want to guard against functional imperatives. Sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, I've gone to a conference and I've heard a great idea, it might be a case study from another organization, or I've read about a best practice, and I thought, you know, our company could really do some neat things with that idea. And so I'll come back and I'll bring that idea forward. What I've forgotten to do sometimes is ask myself, does our business really need this functional imperative? Or am I creating, building, and consuming resources that are really misaligned to what we're ultimately trying to do? And so when we think about this concept of shared services, what we really want to do is base it on these fundamental principles, because these are the things that will help prompt the right questions and the right dialogue among leaders.
Yeah, so what are those steps, right? So we just alluded to the work. So our first step that we would say we want to have is we want to really focus on the work. We want to ensure that we understand how our work aligns to our strategy. So what are the work activities that we do, even within our shared services functions, that enable the strategy directly to be completed? And what are the work items that we do and then we have to do that are necessary? That's the critical component. That's the first step. Until I understand that, it makes us a little bit nervous to go to the next one, which is, okay, once we understand the work and we know where we're going with the strategy, what are the capabilities that we need to have? And to remember that capability is a collection of choices, aligned choices that is sustainable over time. And so once we understand the work, we identify our capabilities, we make those choices, then we're able to move to step 3. And that is actually bringing like-minded people, great people together that can build and understand what our future state organization should look like, function like, and work. This is solving the cube, right? So this is the group of people that now sit down together and begin to solve that Rubik's Cube. And then finally, how do we roll that out? Probably the biggest miss for most companies is this idea of planning and managing change, and that change is just communications. When in reality, the way we look at change, it's really everything in the implementation, and there's a human component to everything that goes on. And so how do we manage that for those designs? So really those 4 steps, we would say, would be the 4 steps that any shared service that's looking at either getting better, building it from scratch, integrating into an acquisition, whatever those things are, you would start with the work, get the capabilities, create together, and plan and manage change. And today what we want to do is we actually want to go deeper into each one of these 4 steps and share a little bit about what we do with our partners as we help do this and work through this design.
So if we start with the work, as Mike said, we want to drill into this a little bit more. There's a very simple concept here which is that not all work is equal strategically in an organization. Some work is more strategic, and some work is more essential to just the running of the business, but not to delivering on a differentiated marketplace position. And the interesting thing is that the strategic work that we do is work that we want to set up and design for effectiveness and for growth and for differentiation, whereas the work that's more essential to just keeping the business running, the lights on, and so forth is work that we have an opportunity to drive consistency, standardization, efficiency, and optimization through. And so the strategic work for us, is probably self-evident. It's really what makes your strategy happen, and it's what brings the greatest value to your end customer. Sometimes when you're working with a shared service, you're a few steps removed from that end customer, and it's easy to kind of think, well, our little universe in the shared service, whether I'm in human resources or I'm in finance or wherever it might be, that little universe is important and it's interesting, but I lose track of the customer. And with strategic work, we always have to be tied and connected back to that. And it's the work that creates truly sustainable differentiation for us. And then the essential work is work that we do that our customers may or may not care a lot about, but we need to do it in order to keep our business running and the lights on, as I said. And it really only becomes a disadvantage to us when we don't do it well, or when we do it in a way that disrupts what the customer expects. And so that's usually how we look at the essential work, and oftentimes it may be work that is regulated or legislated. And the implications of this are that when we go to set up an organization, and when we think about a shared service organization, we want to first understand what does the business need to do that will drive its strategy, and set up the organizations, the structures, the work processes, the talent, and so forth to make sure that that is being delivered on. And then when we start to look at the essential work, figure out ways that we can do this that will drive and support the business, but not overshadow what we're trying to do strategically with the customer. And this fundamental sort of tension between understanding the strategic work and the essential work of the business is the root of shared service design. And sometimes what we see are organizations that blend these. So an organization might choose to take some strategic work and put it in a shared service, but fund it like it is essential work, so it gets underfunded. Or they may put work that is essential into a shared service, which makes all the sense in the world, but they allow for it to be highly customized, or they allow for the costs to be too high. And so really understanding what type of work are we building our shared service to deliver is really at the root of the first question.
So then as we take that, right, as you take this work, we've got the work categorized there, we understand where it fits. Now we can start to look at the Rubik's Cube or the different sides of the cube and start to make choices and to make that happen. And just like a Rubik's Cube can be solved through a set algorithm, we believe that there's a way to go through the design process. And as Reed just said, we start with the work, understanding how the work is, and then once we understand the work, we can move to more of the structure and governance. And we can start looking at what are the right choices for us to make that connect our shared services with our business-facing units. What are the connections that we need to have within the shared services organizations themselves? And how do we govern that? How do we make that happen? One of the most critical components that's missed very, very often unless you really go through the full process is understanding how will we measure success in these shared services? How will they be able to measure, make a true picture, a true case for their successful delivery? Because sometimes it's easier to see that customer-facing group that has sales goals and can see whether they're making their money or not. And the shared service many times gets looked at as a cost center. And we want to make sure that these cost centers or these shared services are able to absolutely deliver some type of metrics to show the value that they're delivering to the company, because they're very, very important. Once we understand the metrics there, then we want to move into our people and rewards. You'll notice that that's the fourth thing. Many times people want to start there. We say that's all the way down at the back end of this. Then we start saying, not even names yet, it's what's the talent we need? What are the roles that we need to have to provide this, to deliver this structure and the work that we've identified? As we continue through the cube then, we jump over and we identify some of our continuous improvement things. So for shared service, that might be such things as some of the lean principles and trying to get costs down and become as efficient as we possibly can. Or it can also be items like some different support models for the front end. And then the last part we look at is leadership behaviors and culture, and how do those behaviors change, or how should they change within a shared service versus other areas of the business, and what kind of a culture does that leave for the business?
Mike, I really like how you walk through this, because for us, these kinds of questions are why there's not a one-size-fits-all for a shared service, and why we see such dissonance in the marketplace around the perceived success of shared service organizations. And so for us, helping leaders to walk through these questions and to carefully consider them will help them not only become aligned as a leadership team around what they expect, but to tailor the way the organization is set up. Sometimes, we're asked by a client, say, can you come in and help us set up a shared service? Yes, we can. And we can absolutely come in and help you do that. And sometimes they're expecting us to open up a binder almost and say, here's what you do. You do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And unfortunately, what that misses is the fact that what the organization needs is really fit for purpose. And that's why...
Yeah, Reed. Go ahead, Reed. I've got one last comment before you move on, so go ahead. Go back to that slide, will you, Reed? Yeah. So I'll carry on to what Reed was just saying. Because there are standard processes that have been proven out in many of these shared services that we do want to borrow sometimes. We do want to utilize. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. The question becomes, which ones do we choose? And how do we connect them? And how do we measure them within our organization to create that value, that fit for purpose that Reed was talking about? So we would say we would not throw that out and say, hey, you expect to start from scratch and not take advantage of some great work that other people have done. Our question to our organizations as we work with them is, what is the right mix for you, and how do we make that fit for purpose?
Great clarification. Thank you. As you started to see, the next step in the process is to create together. And this is a really simple idea, and we sort of alluded to it a bit earlier in our conversation today, but it very fundamentally is trying to bring together what the business needs with what the function that's going to be placed into a shared service is thinking about how it needs to deliver its work in that environment. And too often we see one of two dynamics. One, the business just sort of dictates something and expects the function to just go take the order and implement it. Or on the reverse side, the function has we know better kind of attitude, doesn't bother to ask the business, and tries to set up a capability or a shared service that's not fit for purpose. And so we believe, as Mike indicated earlier, that you're at a point now where you really need to marry together the unique aspects of the business with an understanding of the functions that are going to be enabled through a shared service. And so while this is a very straightforward concept, we see a lot of organizations trip on this. Last month, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, we had a discussion, a webinar on agile organization design. And in that conversation, I was joined by my colleague Doug Von Felt, and we talked about the notion that organization design, if it's done well, is a form of agile thinking and a way of working with agility. In other words, you're bringing together into a focused team setting the voices of people that bring the different points of view that need to be there to answer all of the key questions that Mike just reviewed on the previous page. And imagine that discussion if the voice of the business wasn't there. It would be heavily dominated by people, by thinking, by assumptions that are not informed by the marketplace and are informed by best practices or functional priorities and imperatives that may or may not fit the need of what the business is looking for and turning to the shared service to deliver. So we really strongly advise that organizations look to how to partner and bring those different viewpoints together and create a shared service that's truly fit for purpose so that it can drive the business in the way that it needs to.
Yeah, and another byproduct of creating together is it starts our change management, our fourth bucket. So the more people that we're able to use in co-creation, the faster we can start moving forward in our managing change. So this is a great chart. We've adapted it from William Bridges, but it's the thinking here is around an organizational change, which is, it could be an announcement, it could be a movement of boxes, it could be a closing of a factory, whatever that is, can happen very quickly. And a lot of times we see project management living in this space, right? It's get the project laid out, go through the steps, make it happen. At the same time, what's happening on the back end of this is individuals, the people are going through this transition, and there is not a speed component to individual transition. Don't ever let anybody kid you on that. It takes time and it takes effort. And so we kind of like to talk about change management is one-on-one individual transitions done at scale, aligned with the organizational change components so that we're doing both at the same time. We don't see them as separate activities. There's a couple of good articles that have just barely come out about this idea that you can find and read as well. But the idea is that while we do both activities, we marry those together. Well, why do we do that? Well, if we look at that, it sets and if you want to go to the next slide, Reed, on this, it really allows us to continue our process. If you have something to say on this one first before we move on. But
no, I'm good. Carry on.
Okay. So if we look at this, then if we think about change and we think about how we go about change and how you build it out in your organization, there's tools, there's training, there's structure to change, there's plans, there's KPIs, and all of these pieces, if you'll see here, are interconnected. There's no way to really have a starting point. There's no way to really say change is A to Z here. It is all embedded in itself. And so that's why we feel like it's important to look at individuals at the same time we're looking at the organization and marry those things up. Now, it is critically important. This is probably, in my mind, the greatest cause for failure for a shared service that's being stood up. And what happens is we get through all this design work. We might even do design well. We do a great job of identifying the work and starting with the work. We go through our capabilities. We select make some great choices and have some great capabilities that we've selected. We do those together. We've got a team ready to go. And then we say go. And we stop the support, and we take a bunch of people that are already doing jobs, and we tell them to do new jobs without any kind of a real support mechanism to allow them to work through that. And so our last focus area on this, number 4, is planning and managing change. And we would suggest in this area that you have a change approach, whether that's an approach that you have internal in your company and you're utilizing that all the time, whether that's something that you take from another organization to use, whether it's a resourcing, but that you have a change approach that you can use that embeds the project management of moving this forward with managing individuals and helping them to come from, here's my world today, here's my world tomorrow, how do I bridge that gap? How do I get them across that gap to the tomorrow world? And we're just going to highlight today just one tool we use to do that, and we call it our work transition tool. One of the hardest things to do many times when you're building out a shared service is moving people and coordinating the movement of people from their job today or the projects they're on today to new jobs, new roles, new projects tomorrow. And many times we're doing that across hundreds of roles or hundreds of people. So this is one of our more simple tools that we like to use is we like to get that co-creative team together, that co-created, and we begin to look at all of the work that's happening today in today's structure. And we try to capture that work. There you'll see it on the current board, in the blue, literally by project or name by name if it's somebody. And then we start looking at, in the new plan, what happens to that work? Does it go away? Is it outsourced? Is someone different going to do it, or is it staying where it's at today? And then we take our current role and we say, okay, well, who's doing that today? Then we skip over to the future, to the orange, and we start saying, who is doing this role tomorrow? So we look back to our design, our capability to say, what role is doing this work tomorrow? When does this have to begin by? Because there's usually some kind of an approach, so we have to have it in place. And then what are the requirements from a training, stand-up, resourcing, whatever that is, requirements for that. And once we understand that and we have the entire spreadsheet filled out there, then we can go into the middle part, which is the transition, and we can start saying, if we have to have this work moved by March, then we need to begin to move it in February, or we need to begin to do training on the new role in February so that when the work moves in March, it can happen. And we begin to see a staggered approach to the transformation. The other way we use this, you'll see on the left-hand side where you see some yellow, greens, and reds. We also will use this as somewhat of a status update reporting tool to see if we're on track for moving that work or keeping it where it's at, so that we really can see where we might be falling down and where we might be doing really well. This is an example of mixing project management, which is taking pieces of the organization that we have today and moving them to new pieces tomorrow, and individual transitions, because literally now we're talking not just about the work that's going on, but we're including in who is doing that work and how is that going to be impacted to that individual in the future. And we can begin to plan communication plans and retention plans and implementation plans from the work transition that we have scheduled to. Reed, one of the things that people ask me a lot, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take off your stride. I was thinking about an experience I had recently, because this idea of bringing projects and change together is as part of the same dynamic is really powerful, because I was in a session a couple of weeks ago, and the way it was working is our team from the outside was being asked to help with the organization design work, and the internal team was being asked to manage the change. And there was a moment after about 90 minutes where the internal team had been talking to the senior executives about change. They'd done some beautiful assessment work. They had been talking around what the impacts are going to be, all the variables that were going to be affected by the transition and so forth. And I remember in particular a senior executive, do one of those senior executive moments where they sit back and they sort of make an emphatic point, and they said, this is great and all, but when can we announce this? And when can we move the people? And you could just see them at that moment saying to themselves, look, part of me care how this transition is going to go, and are we going to capture the head, hearts, and hands of everybody? But there was also this business reality side of their head that said, when can I say we're done? And when can I move on to the next thing on my agenda? And when I saw that happen in real life, it really brought home to me the importance, when we think about the setup of shared service, the importance of being able to answer both of those important questions. And so, Mike, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I just really wanted to relay that little story, because I think that was powerful in terms of why this is a key to success here.
On a call this morning with a client that we're helping to begin to implement a global HR redesign. And in that conversation, one of the things that's happening in this design is they're moving from more of a generalist model to a more functional model. so that they're a little leaner, they're a little meaner, but yet they've got some deep capability in some key areas that's critical for the business. And the biggest question up there is, how do we actually take this work if someone's doing 4 and 5 and 6 different jobs today and partition that out into, it doesn't equal, right? You can't take off an arm. You can't cut somebody's arm off and stick it onto somebody else. And how do you do that? And that's a big question mark. And in our experience, what we've seen, especially what we're seeing now, is as more and more of these are coming up, that maybe is the greatest barrier to success, because the business wants to move, to your point, tomorrow into this new roles. Change management, people have to get their heads, hands, and hearts around the idea that I'm not going to do A through Z anymore. I'm only going to do F through M. That's all I'm going to be doing. And how do I help them do that? And that's a critical component. So this is one of the tools we use to do that. There are a couple other tools we use that really merge those things and help us drive that. But it's interesting. I was having that exact conversation this morning, and to your point, the business is already screaming, well, when can I announce this, and when can we put the people in place? And really, it's a point of HR saying, okay, hold on, we got to get this right. And so there's a pushback there, and so we really have to marry those things up.
Mike, can I tell another story that I think might underscore this? Another one of our partner organizations that we've worked with was trying to set up shared services to take advantage of labor arbitrage. And so they wanted to move work from higher cost regions to lower cost regions. And there was the normal churn inside of the organization. Can the people doing the work in another region do the work as well as the people in the current region? Those kind of questions. But what I appreciated that this organization did is they set a ground rule, and they said, look, we want to move the resources, and so there was an incentive from a costing perspective for them to be fairly aggressive about looking for labor arbitrage advantages and opportunities. But they said you cannot put a person in the lower cost region shared service center without a corresponding drop in a resource in the current location. And sometimes, as Mike just said, it's not as easy as a one-to-one, but with that ground rule, it forced a degree of clarity that was needed to make sure that the shared service did not just become a redundant capability, but it actually replaced and supplanted work that was currently being done one way in the business and was now going to be set up and designed in a shared service. And those may seem like very simple ideas, but this notion of moving the work and assigning it to the proper people to do with the right skill sets, and to orchestrate that handing off of the work and the baton pass, we can't underscore how important that is.
Yeah, and I would end with one last piece, and that is to tell everyone there's no right answer. It's the right answer for you, and it's the right answer for your organization. But we're brought in many times organizations that have tried this, and they're trying to do it more and more. And many times they've skipped one of the early steps. So I guess I would tell the audience, don't ever be scared to go back to the earlier steps in this ladder. Don't be scared to say, even though we're at an implementation stage, to say, you know what, did we do all the steps? And if we didn't, it was just an idea, let's go back and let's look at it. Let's validate where we are. We don't have to redesign everything. Let's validate that we actually have the work categorized right. Let's validate that we're working towards the right capability. Let's validate that we've brought the doers together to really figure out how this is going to be done, and then we can move into our change and our management there. So don't be scared at any point to go back into here and do additional work.
Mike, there's a couple of questions that have now surfaced that I'd like to take a pause and try to address, and I'll go ahead and share the questions and make an initial comment here. First question is this: we see some organizations trying to pull together, for lack of a better term, a collective business services type shared service, where they're pulling together multiple functions, back office functions, into one sort of large business services center or capability. And the question really centers around, do those work, and what does it take to make them work? And I guess the way to answer the question, I'll take a run at this, and Mike, you can chime in. We actually find on a collective shared service where you're bringing multiple back office functions together, the track record is mixed. Mixed even more so perhaps than if HR alone, a single function, were to set up a shared service to support its delivery, or if IT were to set up a shared service to deliver some of its work. The reason we find that it's mixed, and perhaps even more so than single functions, is because you're adding complexity, and the expectations of each function by the business might be quite different. And now you're trying to lump them all together and perhaps treat them all the same, and that may go right back to some of the fundamental issues that we've talked about so far, that what HR is needed, what's needed from HR and what is needed from IT might be quite different, and trying to run them and manage them in a consistent business services environment might not allow for the distinctiveness that's required there. The second point I'll make, and then see if Mike has anything he wants to add, is if a larger business services shared service does not bring some unique scaling capabilities, then you have to ask yourself, why do it? In other words, do they have the ability to resource manage or resource plan better than an individual function setting up its own shared service? Does it have technology that allows individual functions to build off of a common platform? Does it have call or contact center type capability that an individual function could never afford or could really ever leverage? If it doesn't have some of these universal capabilities, then all you will really do is lump a bunch of things together, and you will spend a lot of time trying to sort it out and try to find ways to get standardization and efficiency. On the flip side, if you do have some universal capabilities that can be leveraged, then a collective business services type shared service can indeed work if those are taken advantage of. Mike, anything you want to add to that particular question?
The only thing I would add is when we see that be successful is because it's the right alignment to the goals that the business has. So they've gone down and understood the work enough that they're able to say, you know what, we're either trying to become the most efficient we can at all of these, and not any one of them stands up, or if there needs to be one that stood up, we've pulled it out and we're treating it differently, so everything else can be under the same gun. Whatever that is, as long as it aligns with strategy, we see them work. But what we see more often than not is, hey, this is a great idea. Let's throw all this together. Let's get some cost out, and we lose some of the specialness that made us who we are. So
great. The next question that came in here, I think, is a great question, and it really deals with how do you get the rest of the organization to understand how to operate in the new world with a shared service environment when historically you might have walked down the hallway to an IT account manager or to a finance analyst or to an HR generalist that was really close to you. Now you're being expected to virtually contact the shared service or run things through some kind of self-service capability. How do you get the organization to understand that, accept it, and learn to work in that new model? Mike, do you want to take a run at that question first?
Yeah. This is the question that we get from every single organization when we get to this point, because it isn't just about standing up the designed organization. It's about how they connect and how they function with the others. So the first thing that we suggest to our partners, and we try to get done, is while we're co-creating, to bring in some of the other pieces of the business to that co-creation. If we can bring some of those into the co-creation, we begin to identify where our opportunities are to, number one, share with the rest of the business what's going on, and number two, to ensure that the design is such that it delivers what the other pieces of the business need. So it takes away some of that. So the first thing that we coach people on is when we build these teams to co-create, don't be so quick to just say it's just within the function. If we can, we bring some of our super users or some of the people that we really are trying to deliver services to and bring them in the room with us, create with them. Do that, and then at that stage you can move to the other. So that would be one suggestion that we would make towards that rate.
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to add two others here. The first one is think about linkages. When you're designing a shared service, it is not an isolated entity. It has to have connections back to the rest of the organization. And if the organization that really has to work, so if salespeople have to sell, if businesses have to, conduct their business, if R&D groups have to invent products, and they don't understand what the connect points are back into now the new shared service, that's going to be a fatal flaw. The second point I would make is this: don't underestimate the power of scenario testing or use cases, where you bring members of the organization together and you say, let's run through this scenario. Let's practice this. Let's talk it through. Let's map it out. You can do it in varying degrees of formality, but the bottom line is, if in the old world I needed a particular financial forecast or a report, I'd get up out of my chair and I'd walk down the hallway to the FP&A manager in my department, and they'd print me a report. What's the new way I get that report if that's not how I'm supposed to do it in the future? Is there a request form? Is there a call I need to make? Is there a standard suite of reports that I can access myself? Those questions really only get answered as you scenario test that out. So those, to me, are two additional suggestions I'd put forth.
And Reed, I would add to that scenario testing, don't be scared to utilize senior executives in that scenario testing, because that can help with our change management. Because the other pieces in the areas of the business, if they're engaged in that scenario testing, you can start to build that buy-in and that belief that's critical as you start to roll out these changes in the shared services. So don't be scared to invite, senior executives to those scenario tests.
Perfect. As we start to wind down today, we've left this page up because these are sort of, for us, some of the most fundamental steps to ensuring shared service success. Your questions have caused us, of course, to think, oh, well, we could have added a step 5 and a 6 and a 7 and a step 700 even. But really what the key boils down to are making sure some of the fundamental principles of good shared service design are baked in from the very beginning. And when they are, we see a much better success rate in the shared service organization form. Now, before we sign off today, there's a couple of things that we like to do. Well, first is we like everyone who's listening in to take a moment and reflect. One of the things we started off with is talking about what are the triggers for shared services in your organization. And so I'd invite you to take a moment and think to yourself, all right, if you already have a shared service organization and want to make it better, what is the original business case or trigger for that? And on the flip side, if you're setting one up, are you clear? Second thing is, what are some of the prevailing mindsets about the design, the setup, and the implementation of a back office shared service that really need to be addressed in your organization? With all appropriate, love and respect, the folks from the finance lens often take a cost approach to how they look at organizations. So
very surprising.
It's not a surprise. We expect them to do that, but that's a mindset. And if we're setting up let's say it's a sales administration or a sales operations shared service to support our sales force, we might not be as motivated about cost as we are about the effectiveness of contract setup or the appropriate use of T's and C's or customer responsiveness, which are things that might actually cost a little bit more, but are going to be done in a way that better engages our customer and allows us to grow and to sell. And if I walk into the room with a mindset that says take cost out, then I might have a barrier. So we invite you to consider what are some of the mindsets. And then thirdly, we'd like you to consider, do you have the right capabilities, tools, and support to effectively design and implement the back office shared service organization. One of the points that we probably glossed over a little bit today is the fact that to effectively lead a shared service organization requires very distinct leadership capabilities. Sometimes we think we can just drop any old general manager into the role and assume they will be successful. Many will be, but there are distinct capabilities. These are folks that really have to understand how to leverage resources. They understand the power of leverage. They understand lean principles so they can constantly be taking cost out or driving consistency and efficiency. And so you want to be looking for people to help you, whether it's run them or set them up or implement them, that have experience in this area. And so that's the final sort of reflective point that we want to leave with you today. Now, as we wrap things up, Mike and I certainly want to extend our personal appreciation for you taking the time out of your day to listen in and to ask your questions and to engage around this subject that for Mike and I is very point in time, and it's very important. We also want to leave you with a little bit of an offering, if you will, to continue your learning journey. Recently we put together a guide that talks very specifically about how to set up a successful matrix organization, which one day we may do a webinar on that particular topic, but for now we wanted to let you have access to this and use that as a way to continue your learning and growth. And Mike and I continue to be open to questions as we go forward on this subject that we covered today, or even on the guide that we've now made available to you. So we thank you for your time today. I do want to remind you that this presentation, both in its tangible form and also the recording of today's webinar, will be available early next week for all those that have listened in. That if you did not get a chance to hear the whole presentation, or you want to go back and hit on a certain point, or even share it with a colleague, we invite you to do so. And with that, Mike and I say thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session in a few months.